Madam Chair, I rise this morning to support the Levin-McCain amendment. It seems to me that buying more F-22s at this point would meet the very definition of government waste. What you have is a situation where the Pentagon, which suffice it to say hadn't exactly been shy over the years in terms of calling for additional weapons, they are on record as saying this is unnecessary. Further, I've been out talking with members of the Guard at home and trying to get their sense of what is needed in a dangerous time, and they have never once mentioned something like this. They talk, for example, about body armor. They talk about boots. They don't talk about more F-22s. And suffice it to say, when the Congress is now having a debate about trying to find additional money for health care, for example, to go out and spend close to $2 billion to buy 7 more F-22 fighters that the Air Force says it doesn't want, I think just defies common sense. My home state, for example, would love to be able to hire back police and other essential workers that have been laid off. Instead of building 7 planes, we could be restoring infrastructure and developing renewable energy. Again, in my home state, we've had budget shortfalls. We've seen reductions in essential services, law enforcement just being one. The debate, in my view, isn't about necessary steps to ensuring a strong national defense. The question is about whether the United States Congress wants to spend close to $2 billion to pay for more fighter jets that the Air Force doesn't want. I think it's also important to remember that the F-22 is not being purchased for wars that the United States is currently fighting. Certainly the Taliban and Iraqi insurgents do not have an Air Force. The F-22 is being purchased to fight in possible future conflicts with other countries that may have an Air Force. While I strongly believe that the Pentagon ought to be able to prepare for such possibilities, it is the Pentagon who is telling us that we don't need these additional F-22s. I think it's also important to note that the Pentagon has purchased 187 F-22s. So there's not a debate about whether the United States ought to have fighters in our arsenal. The debate is really whether or not the Air Force needs 194 of them instead of 187. We have a very good Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, and Robert Gates has said that 187 are sufficient to combat current and future threats. He's the one who said that more are not needed. He's the one who said, and I quote, "We must break the old habit of layering layer upon layer of cost, complexity, and delay to systems that are so expensive and so elaborate that only a small number can be built and that are then usable only in a narrow range of low probability scenarios." Madam President, I think Secretary Gates has hit the nail just about as perfectly on the head as you can. He and our country want the strongest defense possible, but there are ways to make better use of that $1.75 billion than on 7 more F-22s. Madam President, let me close by saying that I serve on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. I know that there are threats to our forces every single day. There is no question. I see my friend from Georgia who serves on the Intelligence Committee. He feels very strongly about this as well. We need to make sure that we are protecting our troops in harm's way. But we have a variety of choices. We have a variety of choices in order to secure the protection our troops have been in need of. And I intend to work with Chairman Levin, Secretary Gates, the distinguished senator from Arizona, and the President to ensure that we replace the current F-15 with more capable and safer fighters. Last month, I visited with some of the 3,000 members of the Oregon National Guard's 41st Brigade Combat Team as they trained for their current deployment to Iraq. Not a one of the soldiers told me that their big concern was whether the Air Force would have 194 F-22s instead of 187 of them. They talked to me instead about the best vehicles. They talked to me about the best medical care if they're injured. They talked about the best body armor, and not a one of them mentioned the F-22. Madam President, I am not voting against the F-22. I am voting for the soldier. I am voting for the taxpayer. They both deserve our government's greatest protection at this critical time in our history. I urge my colleagues to support the Levin-McCain amendment. And Madam President, with that, I yield the floor.